everyone, this is Matt Skellenger at OnlineMusicLab.com. Today we're going to look at Introduction to Slapping Technique. A slapping technique is a technique that you use your thumb for on your plucking hand, or in this instance it will be our slapping hand, and it's a technique that's used in a ton of different styles, and a cool technique where the thumb bounces off of the string to create the slapping sound. And sometimes slapping is combined with popping, so you get slapping and popping technique. We're going to look at that at another date. Right now we're just going to focus on just the thumb, but an example of slapping and popping is in addition to the slap, you can also use index, middle, ring finger, or pinky even to get a pop sound. So but today we're just going to look at slapping. So if I think about the slapping technique, first let's try to do it without our instrument. If you hold your hand palm up, well, all we're going to do is we're going to take our palm and we're going to move it and twist it to the ground. So twisting our arm from palm up to palm down. And kind of take notice of where your arm is moving to get this to happen. With the slapping technique, I want to use this same approach with a little bit of whip in it, or a little bit of motion to get that sound. So, if I take my fingers and kind of curl them in to kind of make sort of a fist with my thumb out, same technique of open palm to the floor, but now I'm going to bend my arm a little bit, but with that same technique in mind. So when I bend my arm a little bit, I'm not using my shoulder as much as I'm using the muscles and the joints in my forearm and in my elbow. And when I'm doing this today, I'm just going to use the open E string to try and get a good sound out of it. The part of my thumb that I'm hitting the string with is the joint on your thumb and the side of the joint. So it's where your thumb is hard, and it helps if you hit it where that hard spot of that joint is, because that's what kind of creates the bounce of your thumb back up off the string. We're just going to try to do it on the open E string right now because I think initially it's a little bit trickier to get in between those strings and get higher on the strings. Even though that's a great practice and something that you can work towards on your own, today we're just going to focus on the open E string, and then we might use some fingers to fret some notes on the E. Another part of the slapping technique that you hear a lot is a lot of these slapped notes are kind of short or staccato sounding, kind of cut off. And so there's a couple ways of doing that. One of the ways that you can mute those notes is to use this part of your right hand or whatever your plucking hand is or slapping hand. So when I slap the E string, I then use the back part of this right hand to mute that string. Another way of doing it, and depending on where you mute it, you might get a little bit of ring of some harmonics. So maybe experiment with moving your hand around a little bit until you find a spot where it's muted in. Be careful not to slap right over the pickups. You'll hear what I just did. You'll get those pickups to actually hit the string, and you'll get that popping sound, which you want to try and avoid. So typically when I'm doing the slapping, I'll try and do it in between maybe the first pickup and the neck of the bass. You could try to do it back in between the two pickups, but depending on how hard your attack is, you might get a lot more of that pickup noise or the clicking of the string hitting the pickups. And every bass is different. Everybody's technique is different. Some people have a lot heavier technique. Some people have a lot lighter technique. So experiment with going really heavy and light and kind of come to a happy medium. Another way I use to do some muting too, especially when I'm just doing open strings, is anytime I just rest my fingers on the strings without applying pressure, it's going to cut off that sound. So another part of this slapping technique that works really well is slap and then use your fingers on your left hand or your fretting hand to mute the string. So slap, mute, mute. And we're going to try that approach a little bit with just the open E string today, and this is just an introduction to the technique. You can take it and try to be as creative as possible with it and try to create some music with it. But for now, we're just going to do just the open E string. And again, when I'm slapping, my thumb kind of bounces back up off the string again. And I think about that idea of palm to the ceiling, closing or twisting to the palm to the ground, and when it bounces back up, palm to the ceiling again. And I might over-exaggerate this a little bit right now with the idea that once I get better at it, I don't have to move my wrist and my hand quite as much to get that sound to come out. One of the things to try and avoid that I think a lot of people fall into is this idea of really feeling like you need the thumb joint to move a lot to get that sound to come out and get it to whip a lot to get a nice clean slap. But most of it is in the twisting of that wrist or forearm in the same way that we did at the beginning of the lesson. So let's try and do it just on the open E string, and we'll do a quarter note each time, so we'll go. And you might want to mess around with the two different techniques of muting them, and sometimes I even do them both at the same time. I use my palm on my right hand, and I use my fingers on my left hand to get the muting. And depending on where you're muting, you can hear sometimes I'm getting a little bit of a harmonic to ring out after it. Other times it completely, this sound completely goes away. You might want to look at your right hand as you're doing this, put some attention on it, and try and see if there's something that you could be doing a little bit better, or something that you can try to do to move your hand to get a little bit cleaner sound. These are all just suggestions. Again, I think in my experience, the more time I spent with my instrument trying to get it to feel good, that usually translates into sounding good. And with this technique, I've been playing for a long time, and still sometimes it doesn't always sound good. So the more you pay attention to what you're doing and make it feel good, usually that translates to sounding good. So again, just using the open E string, let's try a bass line with it where we're moving around a little bit. So I'm going to go open E, 3rd fret of E, 5th fret, 3rd fret. So open, 3rd, 5th, 3rd. The other thing that you'll notice is that when you do some fretting, the tension on the string changes, which again makes you kind of have to have a different feel or a different way of approaching hitting that string to get it to sound good with the slap. Another technique, or another way of thinking about this technique, because there's a bounce created when my joint on my thumb hits the string, I can try and do 8th notes and get that bounce to come almost create like a perpetual motion with that thumb. So now I'm doing the open twice, open, open, 3, 3, 5, 5, 3, 3 on the E string. If you wanted to challenge yourself to move up a string or up all the strings, you could do this same pattern on every string. So I'll do it on the E string again, then move it up to the A string. D string, and then G. Just a suggestion, with all this stuff, the more creative you are in trying things out, the more fun you're going to have with it. And a lot of times I try and take these techniques and just to come up with my own type of bass line. So especially if I'm just sticking to the E string and just using my thumb, I might mess around with different rhythmic patterns. again, just improvising, and sometimes what I improvise sounds okay. Other times it might not come out sounding exactly like I'd like it, so I work on it until it does. Have some fun with it. Slapping technique, remember again, I think it's all in that open palm, palm to the floor idea, closing the fingers, twisting the arm a little bit so that motion is still happening, but the twist is coming in our forearm and our wrist, and then trying to get a nice bounce off of the hard part of the joint on your thumb. And if you don't get the sound to be as clean as you'd like at the beginning, keep working on it and put a little bit more attention on that right hand. And try and lighten your technique up a lot. You get a big sound with a pretty light technique. I'm not really laying into the string to get that slap to ring out. All right, cool. Hope that helps, and we'll develop this technique further in lessons to come. So I will see you next time. All right, thanks a lot.